question here for the audience. I imagine you all have a perspective on this question, why cloud transformation stall. Only about 10 to 15, or 15 to 20% are on track. You know, what are your thoughts? I'm sure people are thinking there's talent issues, there's technical issues. Our research and our experience suggests that there's one reason that stands above all others, and that's because the board, the CEO, and the broader executive team are not on board with the cloud program. They're not engaged sufficiently. This tends to be a large problem. Gaining consensus across your organization is critical to success with cloud and with your cloud transformation. It's not a big secret. This is probably not surprising to many of you, but it's different than the old capital intensive IT projects of the past where you needed board and CEO approval to get going, but they didn't really have to be actively involved. I'm going to talk about now why that's different with cloud transformations and the importance of having the whole team on board, from the board on down. So the question then is, if you agree with me that at least they probably need to be involved, let's talk about how we're going to make that happen. I'm going to get into some of our research and some of the examples and experiences with this. So first of all, just by way of introduction, I'm Steve Van Kuiken. I'm a senior partner at McKinsey & Company. I lead McKinsey Technology, which is our globally, which is our core tech practice, and our cloud practice falls within that. Before we get into the how, let's first spend a bit of time on the size and scale of the opportunity with cloud. We did a bunch of research on this last year. We looked at the total value that cloud will create by 2030, and it's over $1 trillion. And that's a number that doesn't include all the new businesses and products that will be developed just by technologies that are emerging now. So if you break down that number, there are multiple elements. The most obvious route to cloud value is in helping companies improve core operations and cut IT cost, the kind of value levers that CEOs and boards most often look for and are ready to support. We estimate that this represents up to $430 billion of the total impact at the high end of the range. It's a sizable number, but it's far less than half of the total value that's available. Most of the value that will be created will be through new innovations and innovation-driven growth in pioneering new technologies and new products. Companies that embrace cloud will develop products more quickly, and they will scale them, and they will adapt to changing customer needs more effectively, and make the most of new technologies like AI, ML, 5G, and others. We estimate that this value represents $770 billion in total. It's also worth note that because of the scale impacts of cloud, early adopters will get the disproportionate amount of this value if you look at what's happening now and what will happen going forward. So it's important to think about the pace and the way that you're going about your cloud implementation. Let's talk about a couple of examples, just to bring it alive. One that's particularly salient, given our challenge with the pandemic over the last few years, is Moderna. Enabled by the cloud, Moderna delivered the first clinical batch of its COVID-19 vaccine candidate to the NIH for phase 1 trials just 42 days after initial sequencing of the virus. They leveraged cloud scalable compute and storage infrastructure to analyze and quickly design research experiments. They also used the fully managed cloud data warehousing services to integrate insights from experiments running in parallel and then rapidly refine and design and the production cycle. And finally, the adoption of cloud principles helped them automate good practice compliance processes so they could move quickly while staying secure and compliant. And it's not just newer companies with limited technical depth who are benefiting. We talked, if those of you who are in for the security keynote, the professor talked about Maersk. Now I'm going to talk about the good news side of that story, interestingly enough. Maersk is the largest shipping line and vessel operator in the world. And they use the cloud to build out new capabilities that were not possible in their on-prem environment. Enabled by the cloud, they were able to gather data from all points in their network, so terminals, cranes, ships, to amass a trove of data that will allow them to do analytics at scale, which they were not able to do prior. They were able to centralize and analyze planning, scheduling, and preventive maintenance. And they're also able to move all of their sales and service online. The impact for Maersk was transformative. They redeployed thousands of FTEs who previously did the work manually. They also were able to optimize and improve the yield on their capital equipment. And most importantly, they shared the benefits with their customers who can use the data provided to optimize their own schedules and improve the yields on their own equipment, all of which they could not have done without the cloud. Now, in these examples and many others that are similar, the innovation the cloud unleashed drove far greater value. It wasn't simply a case of cheaper and faster. It was a case of we can do things we were not able to do before. Now, against this backdrop of exciting innovation, CEO and boards are still not meaningfully engaged. We see over and over again that they don't understand the cloud's ability to enable and drive business value. In more than 3/4 of organizations, CEOs and boards struggle to provide the required long-term mandate and support, and to not only align on a vision and priorities, but also be clear about the complexities of technology and the technology implications of business decisions. Further, more than 50% grapple with poor tech literacy. This lack of understanding, buy-in, and support can show up in several ways. I think many which may be familiar to you. One, the CEO and the board view cloud as a technology problem to be solved by the IT organization. Two, cloud is not positioned as an enabler, an integral element of the overall business strategy. And three, the CIO is not part of the executive leadership team. And the technology team is positioned in service to the organization itself as opposed to jointly with the business in service to end customers. And then in many of these cases, even the operational benefits of cloud that I talked about, the $430 billion, is not available. So the CEO buy-in is essential to getting it funded, but also, more importantly, engagement along the way to make sure that your implementation and your cloud migration is successful. In fact, at one consumer packaged goods company, it was the CEO themselves who pressed the case for cloud adoption, setting the top-down strategy and communicating with the entire company in written updates and town halls. As the CIO told us in our research, it's not enough to have the CEO on board. You need the CEO and board-level support to provide air cover. It's important to know they are with you as you engage with other leaders in the organization. We see the truth in these words over and over in our work. When we studied companies that have successfully migrated more than 2/3 of their IT hosting spend to the cloud on schedule, we found that they were more likely to have active CEO sponsors. Further, when business and IT co-create a company strategy and revisit it together throughout the year, they are less likely to have conflicts over the timing of cloud migration and less likely to experience challenges around the value it creates. In this case, the CEO is making the case for transformation and everyone commits to it at a strategic level. Another thing which I think is true is board sponsors, especially with those who have past experience of major technology change, can also play a critical role. Many boards are now adding technology expertise, which I think is very important to tap into. I think it's critical to get this right up front because we're seeing a mass increase in the speed of companies going to cloud. I mean, the flexibility, the scalability, the innovation inherent in the cloud is just too compelling to ignore. And in fact, 1/3 of those that we've interviewed reported accelerating and expanding their cloud migrations. This has especially happened coming out of the pandemic. Again, to make the point, the early movers will gain significant advantage over competitors and in some cases, attackers. So in many ways, your company's ability to compete in the future lies on all of your shoulders and the internal coalition that you build. So, how do you make this shift and get the necessary support and buy-in? We suggest there are 3 actions to take. 1, help your CEO and board understand the cloud and its potential. In the many CEO and board training sessions that I conduct on technology in the cloud, I find that CIOs and technology vendors speak in a language that is hard for the CEO to fully absorb. It implicitly assumes a level of understanding that the CEO may not have and often can be filled with acronyms and jargon. And And it's also not the discussions are not necessarily framed around the issues that are important to the CEO and what their role is in leading the overall organization. Also, board members, when interviewed, will ask for two things: some help with tech literacy and a new frame of reference that describes cloud in relation to the value it can enable and how it fits with the corporate strategy. So for instance, when boards meet for a retreat, they often have an evening get-together before the meeting, and the best of those often feature a host speaker. It's a perfect time to host someone who can bring alive the cloud and the impact of it. And then you can follow that up with a joint audience of board and management where everyone can discuss these ideas and how they might apply to your organization. Second, you've got to make the opportunity real. Your argument for cloud-based initiatives cannot focus on the problem, the risk of not acting. It's important to make a positive case for the value cloud can create. You can completely change the dialogue by framing the trends, the technology, and the choices around business impact that cloud enables. One large financial information provider moved their applications to the cloud after they determined that they could do it in the cloud in a matter of weeks and at negligible cost, compared to the millions of dollars that they would have spent in their on-prem environment. You can easily see how that would be a very specific and good business case to make, and how compelling that would be for the leadership team. Further, when there are trade-offs or different ways to finance the investment, the CEO and the board can engage in more detail, but first they need to understand that context around how the shift to the cloud changes the way the business goes to market or interacts with their customer. And finally, we would say build trust by going on the journey together. It can be tempting to keep the CEO and the board out of what you are doing. You might assume it's not worth their time, or frankly, their interventions may not be that helpful. It's a fairly common instinct for all of us, especially tech professionals. Trust me, we've got this under control. I'll let you see the results when they're done. We've all heard that before. With a program as big and transformational as cloud, if your CEO and the senior team are not on part of this journey, it's hard for them to see the destination. Radical transparency helps. Run sessions with your leadership team where you talk about the cloud transformation, the things you want to try and why. Examples help. Exposure outside of your company helps. Change the language you normally use so that the people start to see what you do as a strategic driver of the business, not just as a cost center. In other words, describe in terms of revenue growth, margins, ability to scale new markets, and so on. Finally, the days of determining technology needs based upon what the strategy asks for are over. Now strategy must be developed in a way that fully integrates technology and its possibilities. As a tech leader, you should be intimately involved in the formation of that strategy. Now, the flip side of that coin is you will need to bring the CEO into the challenges, failures, and course corrections along the way. So finally, in the next few years, CIOs are going to wield more and more strategic influence. Already, our research shows that more than half report directly to the CEO, up from a third a few years ago, and more than half are in the ELT. Half expect IT budgets to grow in 2022. The wind is at your back. But it's not going to happen unless the CEO and boards are invested financially and emotionally in what you are doing. By helping your CEO and board understand the potential of cloud, making the opportunities real, and building trust along the way, then you'll have your own shot at a disproportionate share of that $1 trillion in value. Now with that, we're going to shift to a broader discussion on cloud, and I'm going to ask my panelists to come up, and we'll get settled here.